You might have picked up on the emphasis today is one of those church words called eat. Eat. Eat occurs 23 times in the Gospel of Mark, 21 times in the Gospel of Matthew. Begins in Eden, and here we are today from Eden. So Cynthia and I are going to read back and forth to keep your attention going, we hope, of some eating times.
So from Genesis 2:15 through 17 and 3:6 through 7. Yahweh, the Lord, took the human and set him in the Garden of Eden, to work it and to watch it. Now Yahweh, God, commanded concerning the human, saying, from every other tree of the garden you may eat. Yes, eat. But from the tree of knowing of God and good and evil you are not to eat from it. Now the two of them, the human and his wife, were nude, and they were not ashamed. And now the snake was more shrewd than all the living things of the field that Yahweh had made. And the snake said to the woman, God said you are not to eat from any of the trees of the garden. And she replied, he said you are not to eat from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, lest you die. And the snake said, you will not die. The woman saw that the tree was good for eating, and that it was a delight to the eyes, and the tree was desirable to contemplate. And she took its fruit and ate it, and gave some also to her husband beside her, and he ate it, and they saw that they were naked.
The next comes from the Exodus. Moshe leading the people across the desert. Now when Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, I have hearkened to the grumbling of the children of Israel. Speak to them and say, between the setting times you shall eat flesh, and at daybreak you shall be satisfied with bread. Now it was sunset, and a horde of California quail came up and covered the camp, and at daybreak there was a layer of dew around the camp. They said to each other, manna, which means, what is that? Moses said to them, it is the bread that Yahweh has commanded. Glean it. And when they measured it out, those who gathered much had nothing over. It came out just even. And those who gathered little had no shortage. It came out just even. They had as much as each of them needed.
And then from the Gospel of Mark, and when the hour had already grown late, his disciples would approach him and say, this place is desolate. Send the crowd away so they can eat. But in response, he said to them, give them something to eat yourselves. But Jesus, it would take 6 months' wages to buy that much food. How many loaves do you have? Go, look. They found out and they said, 5 and 2 fishes. And Jesus instructed the crowd to sit on the grass by the hundreds and by 50s, and he blessed the food and even distributed pieces of the 2 fish. Everybody had more than enough to eat. And then they picked up the 12 baskets full of leftovers, including some fish. And the number of the men came to 5,000.
Men. Just men. Remember that. The next story is also from Mark, after Jesus has gone through challenging the purity laws, washing your hands before dinner, pulling grain out of the tower on the Sabbath, and a few other things. Once again, there was a huge crowd without anything to eat, and he calls the disciples and says to them, I feel compassion for the crowd, since they have already been here 3 days and haven't had anything to eat. The disciples say, how can we feed them out here in the desert? You remember that, desert. Jesus says, how many loaves do you have? And they replied, 7. He orders the crowd to sit down, and he took the loaves and the few fish, and he gave thanks. They had more than enough to eat. Then they picked up 7 baskets of leftover scraps, and there were about 4,000 people. Not men, people.
And in Matthew 7, 7 and 9, we're reminded, ask and it shall be given. Seek and you'll find. Knock, it will be open for you. Who among you would hand a son a stone when it's bread he's asking for?
Indeed. Did you ever do that with one of your kids? Not yet. Eat, Pray, Love. Big book. Little book, actually. Big seller. Elizabeth Gilbert story. And she's in a bad marriage situation. She's fooling around. She breaks up the marriage. And she falls apart. And she gets really depressed. And to solve her problem, she decides to travel first to Italy and eat her way from Corsica to the heel, all the way up to Rome, all the way up to Asti. You know, from red pasta all the way to risotto. She got fat. That didn't help her. Food's not always, it's not a simple good. Then there's Michael Pollan, and he says, he writes food books, right? Omnivore's Dilemma and all that. That we are amazing creatures, human beings, because we can eat almost everything on the planet. Some critters have to specialize in stuff in the ground, nematodes, worms, things like that. Ooh. You can eat them if you want, but I wouldn't recommend it. And some specialize in plants, green plants. Some specialize in berries, the birds that clean your trees. And some specialize in meat, eating each other, so to speak. And some have borders, like dogs will eat meat and grass. That's to settle their tummy out a little bit. And some people eat dog food. Well, that's another topic. So we're uniquely situated and uniquely gifted and equipped to survive on this globe because we are so incredibly adaptive. So, how is it that so many people are hungry? How is that possible? You've seen pictures of Haiti, I'm sure. Half of the island, Haiti, is denuded. All the trees were taken out during an exploitative period in Haiti's history. So when it rains, the water runs down bare hills right into the towns and villages and creates havoc. The other side of the island, different story. It's amazing to think that a lot of the world really does go to bed hungry. So what is this? There is enough for all stuff. It just doesn't look that way, does it? Do you have enough? I do. Do you have enough? Yeah, I do. But it seems to be a real problem for us on a larger scale. I mean, I can get up to Thanksgiving and Christmas size, I can even get up to community meal size. I'm still okay. I can almost go to one of those awful hotel luncheon things. But it's enough, it's enough. It's like children in school now get increasing calories that are emptier and emptier. And the rate of diabetes among children, as you know, is on a trajectory for a pandemic in this country. 13-year-old boys were examined in a recent study, found that their heart was already beginning to thicken. Asymptomatic, but it will show up whenever that little time bomb goes off. It's crazy. Why is that? Well, we've got lots of explanations, 30 years ago, we claimed we were going to maintain our standard of living while, in fact, it dropped. And it continued to drop until the second spouse in the family frequently went to work, requiring usually 2 cars, some child care. So all those added expenses netting out at about a 7% increase over 30 years. That's not much. Meanwhile, the kids are left to their kind of own devices, and we encourage buying calories on the cheap. Don't have time to cook? Stop at McDonald's. Don't have time to plan? Go to Kentucky Fried. Get the whole meal, right? And the bloating goes on. And you wonder if we're depressed. How is it that this could happen? And why in the world do we let it? Well, now, think if you were in some parts of the Sudan or Indonesia right now, or other parts of the world where there is actually a real worldwide food scarcity. And there are all kinds of methods we've been training people with for all kinds of years about how to improve productivity, make it more green and sustainable. But for all our efforts, the nature of trade is such that most of those who are growing are not being rewarded very well, and they are being replaced by machines, and jobs are being exported out of the country, and the problem grows. So what does that have to do with 5,000 men and 4,000 people in these stories, Well, I think it has a lot to do, because I am convinced. See, I started my own garden 2 years ago, so I'm now an expert. I am convinced my food tastes better than yours. And I have free access to it, as do the deer and the raccoon and the squirrels. And between us, we work out an, sort of arrangement. You take that section, you guys eat over there. So it all kind of works out. And I am convinced that if we had a stone soup movement around the world, and we went around collecting really enormous stuff to incredibly share with people so all was well, it would not be a pyramid like this where super rich are like this and don't know what to do with all that. And other people are down here and they don't know what they're going to do today. Stone soup. Teach your children about stone soup. Practice the art of good company, and you'll improve the nature and the attitude of the world we live in. So may it be. Amen.